Okay, so April and I were just discussing, based on a YouTube follower's comment, is that he has a 2025 Honda Pilot, and he was going to change his oil every 3,000 miles with Valvoline Restore and Protect.
Correct.
And then he said at 30,000 miles, he's going to use a camera and go in and inspect his intake valves. So I'm not really familiar with that engine. If it has, I sneak you out. Yeah, I just fogged her. I fogged her.
That was bad.
Woo! And here's, and I don't know that engine yet, and I didn't look it up. I think Honda did go to a dual fuel injector on their engine, but I'm not sure. So if it doesn't have a dual fuel injector, meaning GDI, which is combustion chamber injected fuel on a high pressure system, and then it's using above the intake valve traditional, he won't have carbon buildup. He'll have deposits from fuel and just the way that engines run, but he's not going to have that thick buildup of resin and goo and chewy, gooey crap building up on top of his valves. So the newer systems are designed to wash those valves with fuel and vapor. So basically pressure washing the intake valve. So if his engine does not have this newer design GDI, the newer design engine, not newer design GDI, it's a GDI engine with traditional intake flow fuel injectors. That will clean those intake valves. And he will still have natural deposits. He's not going to have horrible deposits. And the cleaner he keeps his oil, the less likely that's going to happen. And this is, the discussion is, if you have a GDI engine that is not the updated design where your intake valves are being cleaned by another set of fuel injectors, and you're still going to have deposits, and I've proven it, but you're not going to have the deposits like you would with the GDI engine that doesn't. And why does this happen? And here's the scenario. Engine oil, think of engine oil like a sponge. Okay? A sponge, when we're talking molecules here, engine oil can only absorb so many contaminants and carbon molecules. Okay? And once the oil, now, and we're talking small molecules, and then we're talking larger molecules, they can only absorb so much of that. So once the oil stops doing that process, right, which is collecting the carbon and fuel and whatever else, moisture that's going into that's happening in the engine, and a byproduct of combustion is moisture. So just so everyone's clear about that, atmospheric changes with humidity and everything else produces moisture. Your engine is not a sealed unit. Your air filter and throttle body are open to ambient, and then your ferrous and non-ferrous materials in your engine react to atmosphere. So once the engine oil, right, most people nowadays drive their engine oil till it's black. The engine oil is full, right? It's up to its eyes with the molecules that it's designed to take on, right? And then now the engine oil can't do its job anymore. The oil filter can't do its job anymore. That's why there's micron differences in oil filters to collect different levels of deposits and debris. So, you know, some are, you know, whatever the micron, the minimum amount of micron, and then some are the maximum amount of micron. That's why you hear always use a good filter. But what does that mean to the customer? Well, it doesn't mean how much it weighs. It means what's the micron? What is its cleaning effect? What's the ability to store, capture? So once your oil is maxed out, right? So it's coating clean and clear, and then in 3,000 miles it's brown, and then in 4,000 miles it's brownish black, in 5,000 miles it's black, in 7,000 miles it's black, and then in 10,000 miles you're 3 quarts low on oil, and then now you have the cooking effect of those molecules in the oil, which now are becoming larger deposits. Those larger deposits now are going to stick to metals that are hot and then cooling. And then where this happens the most is because the engine is slinging. Like, ever take a mixer and you're like, me, and there's crap flying everywhere without the lid? Well, that's what your engine is doing to the oil down there. It's spinning and spinning. It's aerating. It's picking up moisture. it's picking up fuel dilution, and the lower the oil volume in the engine, the worse it becomes. The cheaper the fuels you use, the worse it becomes. And the more demand you put your engine on, the worse it becomes. So it's just it's a multiplier. And then what happens is that now that larger carbon molecules that is suspended in the vapor in the engine is now flowing through the PCV system constantly. So positive crankcase ventilation. And then if you have a turbocharged vehicle or boost, then it really supercharges that, because the engines they build are crap with little to no sealing power in the cylinder walls. So then you shut your car off, all that oil vapor with the larger molecules cools off on top of that valve, and then you're still running a crappy oil, and then now it's layer after layer after layer. When you look at it, if you ever seen these carbon valves, it is a thick, soft, chewy Laffy Taffy. That's what it is, Laffy Taffy, or a little less consistency of that. But you can get it, you can easily chip it and break it away, but the engine can't do it. And I'm shocked that they didn't come up with some vibration technology that you could just pull the valve cover, right, and then put it on the valve stem, and then use vibration technology to shatter that shit right off. But I guess eventually it will come. That's the problem with GDI engines and overextended oil changes. The sponge, right? The oil sponge effect can't collect anymore. The oil's full, even though it's still lubricating. And you have another 300 miles to go for viscosity reasons, but its properties to protect and clean are done. It can't store anymore. The sponge can't take on anything else. You take a sponge, put it in a clean bucket, right, and start cleaning up some shit. The sponge can only hold so much. Then you got to wring that sponge out for it to collect some more, and then there's smaller molecules that are in that sponge. Eventually the sponge gets to a point to where it can't do its job anymore, and that's basically what oil is. And then the larger molecules are causing that buildup on the intake valves and on the oil control rings and everything else in your engine that it wasn't designed to do. So, and it all stems from not changing your oil. So change your oil when the oil is not full of contaminants, right, and molecules that it was designed to collect, because your oil is not going to collect molecules that it can't hold anymore. So that's what happens when you open the oil pan, right? And then oil runs out, and then you have sludge run out. Okay? That oil couldn't collect that large sludge molecule anymore, and that's why it left that snot in your engine. Or, I've pulled valve covers off where it's pudding over top the valves, and oil came out the drain plug, but the oil couldn't collect those sludge molecules because they're too large. So, and then it starts to build up on the valves. Like, your intake valves aren't typically as hot as your exhaust valves. So they technically run at a cooler temperature for many different reasons. And that's why you see that effect. You don't usually see carbon build up on exhaust valves because the temperature is usually higher on the exhaust valves. Hot exhaust, right? Intake is cooler path. So that's, there you go. So change your oil sooner. Don't let it get full of sludge and contaminants, and you are less likely to have carbon intake buildup that has to be scraped or media blast or walnut blasted off your car, or driving around with misfires and causing other issues. It will still leave deposits behind with clean oil. That is its design. The crankcase ventilation system is to move that blow by and anything that's suspended in the crankcase ventilation system through the intake path. So if you look at throttle bodies, well, it's not sucking in oil and moisture technically through the air filter intake. If there's a tube that's coming from the valve cover or the crankcase or the engine block that goes before the throttle body, well, where is it depositing those deposits? On the cool throttle body and throttle plate when it cools off. And then through the intake path, and then you can actually see some engines where the carbon deposits in flow, and then you'll see spots that there isn't. That's just the way that the deposits are flowing through the intake path. But the intake valves are taking the brawn of that, and your piston tops. So how do you avoid it? Sooner oil changes. Don't let your oil become full and then you won't have these issues, and that's the way it goes. You're still going to have to do regular induction service to remove those deposits, not carbon buildup. Deposits, you know, surface deposits of what happens is fairly normal, but it should never be disgusting and built up to the point to where your valve stems can't move between through the valve guides, or the valve is so built up with carbon behind there that when you cold start your engine, it cranks with no compression, and then as soon as that gets a little heat in there from friction, the engine will stop misfiring and start to idle normal, and then eventually you're going to get to the point where you can't drive your car because the valves aren't closing and you won't have any compression, and hope that you don't bend a valve or bend a valve stem, because the carbon, you know, and mechanics of how that works, you know, that valve is just supposed to go up and down, straight up and down, and without any interference, or it could tweak the valve stem or wear out a valve seat or things like that. But yep, that's how it happens. Overextended oil changes, a very aggressive crankcase ventilation system, and sometimes there's multiple ways that it's collecting crankcase ventilation and vacuum, like these 18 and up Hondas. There's 3 vacuum lines that feed the intake path on these GDI engines, and you can see where it's in flow from that vacuum line, from the valve cover to number 1 cylinder, from the valve cover to, did I say that? Yeah, no, sorry, cylinder 4, and then another vacuum line between 2 and 3, and then I think there's one more that's vacuum on cylinder 1. Well, where do you think I find most of my carbon buildup? Between 4 and 2 and 3 on these newer Hondas. And then once you have those problems, then the engines are running with incomplete combustion because the valves can't seal, and just it multiplies more problems. But if you have a clean oil, chances are you're going to have clean intake valves, and you're just going to have to do routine maintenance, which is an induction service to keep them clean. But keep running your oil to where, like I explained to you, that the oil can only hold so many carbon molecules before it's full, and that's the way it goes. And then anything that's suspended in the vapor from combustion, boost, blow by, aeration from the oil and vapor being suspended in the crankcase and the cylinder head and the intake manifold, that's all going into the intake valves through the intake path, top of the pistons, and then eventually, if you look at your tailpipe, if your car's got an issue, it's going to show up on your tailpipe with a black ring around it, and that's typically oil. All right, guys, I hope that explained how that happens. Thanks for watching.